Hey friends, welcome back to week 9 of Rotoworld's DFS building blocks. As always, I am John Daigle, joined by none other than Ian Hartitz. Ian, how is it going? Now 9 weeks in, we can say we're halfway through the season.
I threw you off with that brilliant salute.
Yeah, well, also the silence afterwards. I expected to kick it to you and say something, but that's fine. We're still getting it.
It's been good, man. It's crazy that we're halfway through the season now, but hey, we got the best half still to come. So
best half still to come. We have a lot of data, but as always, we do like to start this show with the Thursday night game. Not only because it warms up our taste buds for the week, but also because we're going to forget to talk about it at the end. Right. So let's get into it. I know you have some plays ready to go, some captain options perhaps for this Thursday game. And remember, as we're talking about this, we are still taking questions both on Twitch and YouTube. So keep them coming in throughout the show, and we will get to them as we move along.
So both offenses are going through some changes at the moment. 49ers added Emmanuel Sanders, obviously, to be their new number 1 wide receiver, and that has some ramifications for the rest of the guys. So Dante Pettis' season, I don't want to say it's canceled because I don't think it ever got started this year.
I thought you were going to say it's Dante Pettis' season. No, it's not.
No,
okay.
It's definitely not. I mean,
good.
He had 3 targets last week, so did Deebo Samuel, but don't be confused. Deebo is on the field for 70% snaps. Dante was 30%. So it's Manny Sanders as their number 1. Deebo is their number 2 he has 5 rush attempts this year. Shanahan likes to get this guy the ball. Second-round rookie. Clearly they like him. He's good. I mean, I think behind Kittle and Sanders, Deebo has the best chance of providing some fantasy value, but it's still, such a run-heavy offense that I think we're going to struggle to see too many pass catchers week to week. But after that, for showdown, I think maybe consider Marquise Goodwin because he wasn't active last week for a personal reason, so we've seen Kendrick Bourne out there. I'm not exactly, it could still be a split situation. Again, I think it's Deebo and Manny are the only 2 guys totally ingrained there. But beyond them for a showdown, hoping for that big play, Marquise Goodwin.
Marquise Goodwin, that's just someone I was on initially. My only concern, and it's a 1-game slate, so it's whatever, but the concern would be that he's only seen 16 targets all year long. However, as you said, yes, healthy scratched last week, but he's still going to come back and continue playing. He's played in over 60% of the team's snaps in every game but 1 this year. I don't count the Washington game because even if you watched it on Game Pass, 24 minutes long, it was more of a defensive battle. We can throw that game out the window. But now against this Cardinals team, it's a great spot. You just need one of his few targets to hit on the day. What about the Cardinal side, though, for you?
So we have pay attention to these actives, inactives, because they're
and the running backs are also, the big topic of discussion.
Exactly. So it seems like David Johnson's not going to play. I know Cliff left him questionable, and he said his chance.
And Schefter's came out Thursday morning and said he's not expected to play.
Okay, yeah, so Schefter's been on that for the last week. Either way, if he does play, it's looking like extremely limited snaps. I wouldn't be shocked if this is another one of those emergency active only type situations. But with that said, I mean, it's tough to even get behind Kenyon Drake here, getting that big of a role. But I mean, Alfred Morris, Zach Zenner, these are not guys that have anywhere close to Kenyon Drake's ability as a receiver. So if you want to mess around with these running backs, I think you still go with Drake. But with that said, man, only guy I want in this offense is Christian Kirk right now because he has been getting fed the ball all season long. 9.6 targets per game this season. Only guys with more, Michael Thomas, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Boyd, DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen, and Julian Edelman. I know a lot of these targets have been just short screens. He's not really the most fancy-friendly workload in the world, but I mean, all preseason up until before he got hurt, we were talking about Christian Kirk being the number 1 receiver in his offense. We've seen Larry Fitzgerald kind of turn to dust over the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Hasn't caught for over 70 yards since week 2.
Absolutely brutal. So it's, Kirk's the only one I want. If you want to get crazy with the showdown, it's Kirk, Fitzgerald, and Bird in 3 wide receiver sets. Their 4 wide receiver thing that they were really sticking with earlier in the season has gone away a little bit. Trent Sherfield was about a 50% snap rate.
Keyshawn Johnson, healthy scratch last week.
Exactly, because they're getting Charles Clay and Max Williams a little more involved. Again, I think Kirk's really the only guy you can fire up with any level of confidence in this offense. But with that said, don't dismiss Kyler Murray in this matchup just yet. I know it's not ideal. I know they're amazing, but it's just the rushing, man. Other than Lamar Jackson, he has the highest rushing floor in the league. They are the only 2 quarterbacks with over 100 rushing yards on designed runs this year. He's not just running around with his head cut off like a chicken like Josh Allen or anything.
Right.
I think it's somewhat sustainable. Maybe they don't do it a ton in this matchup because the front 7's so tough, but
it's a tough matchup.
It is.
But if it is a tough matchup, as we said, and it's negative game script, which is what we expect for the Cardinals, and thus positive game script for the 49ers, do you have a lean on their backfield? Because right now, the way the tea leaves read is that Tevin Coleman's still good to go, still the team's red zone back and number 1 back. And we expect both Mostert and Breida to be healthy. And we've seen Breida now 2 weeks in a row, the Iron Man of the NFL last year, always going out, always coming back. It doesn't matter. We know he's going to play most likely. Jeff Wilson, this is why you say we need to look at inactives, because Jeff Wilson's likely a healthy scratch if those three are all good to go. So do you have a particular lean? I know Tevin Coleman's the obvious one, but would you suggest for tournament contrarianism, like going somewhere else to Breida perhaps?
I think Coleman and Breida, anytime these guys are active, can be fired up as borderline RB2s in pretty much any matchup, because we've now had, this will be the fourth game, I think, that Coleman, Breida, Mostert, and Wilson have all been active. And whenever they've been active and healthy, like, it's been Coleman and Breida. We have not seen Mostert except for garbage time. The only time we saw Wilson a couple weeks ago when he had those 4 carries was when Iron Man Breida was out there. He had to get cleared from the protocol. I think he got poked in the eye at one point. The dude just has every injury known to man. But as long as they're healthy, which, you know, Breida isn't super healthy at the moment, but if he's out there, he's healthy enough. It's going to be Coleman and Breida, and I think just going off of Coleman's massive game last week, I imagine he'll have the higher ownership. But like with that said, Breida was the one out there on the first snap of the game last week. Like, they're treating him as a starter, even though it's a 2-back system. Most run-heavy offense in the league. You can fire up both these guys for, you know, if they stay active the whole game, they don't get too far in front, 15-plus touches per week.
So under the gun, your one captain spot you're leaning towards tonight.
George Kittle. This guy is
okay. We haven't talked about him yet.
Due for some touchdown regression. 3 touchdowns this year, nullified by penalty. I think he's had a couple more where he just got pretty close. And, you know, we've talked enough this year about the Cardinals' awful tight end defense. And, you know, it doesn't even matter with Kittle because he's just the #1 receiver in a very good offense facing a mediocre secondary.
I'm leaning towards either Kittle or Breida when I make some lineups here after the show.
I like
but
it.
Either way, as we move along here and talk about the Week 9 main slate, remember, we are taking your questions both on Twitch and YouTube throughout the show. We'll get through them as we talk about positions. It's an interesting slate, not only because there's only one game over a 50 total in that Lions-Raiders game that we'll discuss, but also there are 3 other games over 45, so a lot of potential to go over. It's obviously easy to stack the game that's the highest total. No, we want to go the game that has a chance to go over, not just the highest total in general. So with that being said, we got lucky. We hit on Mike Evans last week. You just suggested Tevin Coleman. I wasn't even on Tevin Coleman until you talked about him. And as you said, it was strictly a salary point. It was disgraceful that they still had him salaried like around $5K.
I'm still mad.
Still upset about it, even though he's much higher on Thursday. So anyways, with that, let's go ahead and get into our building blocks for this slate. That doesn't include Houston and Jacksonville, although I wish it did, because they play the early game in London. What about your quarterback for the week?
So last few weeks, I've been having to go higher up in the salary scale to get a quarterback I like. But this week, I'm fine with Phillip Rivers at 5,100. And he's actually popping right now as our top value player of the week, just in terms of dollars per fantasy points on our lovely DFS toolkit. And look, the Chargers, it's been very up and down this season, but last week it really wasn't as bad as it was made out to be. I mean, Rivers hit Keenan Allen and Mike Williams for should have been touchdowns that were just flat out dropped in a pretty tough road matchup against the Bears. Now he's got this Packers defense that they are set up pretty well against the Chargers in terms of, you know, they got Za'Darius and Preston coming off the edge. I think Jair Alexander and Kevin King are better cornerbacks than they're given credit for. But with that said, like, I'm looking at more of this from a negative game script perspective because I don't think the Chargers can stop the Packers. So I just think this could be a game where we see Rivers having to throw almost the entire time. And look, he's got all of his weapons finally. This is only the 3rd week now where we got Keenan, Mike, Hunter Henry. Maybe the new offensive coordinator gets Eckler more involved again as a receiver. So a lot of things going Rivers' way. He has 20 or more fantasy points in 5 of 8 games this year. I mean, he doesn't really have the 30-plus point ceiling that some of these other guys do, but at only 5,100, if they're going to price him along guys like Mayfield, Rudolph, Trubisky, I mean, I'm just going to take that price point and hopefully spend up elsewhere.
And I think this is one of the games that does have sneaky shootout potential.
Yes.
Because I believe we know what the Packers could do, right? We've seen it the past 2 weeks, and they experienced a lot of drops against the Lions. So really the past 3 weeks. But the Chargers are an offense, whether they change coordinators or not. Chargers are absolutely an offense. A lot of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen both due for positive regression in air yards and just end zone targets in general. Like, yeah, this is one I think is poised to explode. For mine, though, as you look at the screen right now, it is Derek Carr. So first of all, I picked Derek Carr. I did like Phillip Rivers. I'm glad you discussed him, but I like Derek Carr because I like giving cheap options in cash. We talked about Tannehill last week. Still threw 3 touchdowns. Should have been more yards, but But when you get 3 possessions inside the 10, it's kind of hard to throw for yards. But hey, he at least scored. But the fact is, Derek Carr also a cheap option, only $5,500 on DraftKings in particular, and it is once again a tremendous matchup. Last week he got the Texans, took advantage of their cornerback situation, didn't hit that 300-yard plateau, but still 285 yards and 3 scores. This week, whether Darius Slay plays or not, the fact is the Lions are bottom 5 in pressure rate created. Yes, the Raiders' offensive line is missing center Rodney Hudson and perhaps missing their backup center Andre James, but Derek Carr quietly has the highest completion rate under pressure this year. And yes, dumping it off does have something to do with that. Yeah, using both Darren Waller and Foster Moreau does make a difference, but it's still a tremendous matchup against this Lions defense that has allowed the most raw passing yards on the year. So I think it's one that shoots out. We know Stafford loves to go through the air. We'll talk about the Lions offense more in a bit. So yeah, I think you can confidently lean on Carr if you're looking for another cheap quarterback option.
I want to say the only offense that's averaging more yards per play than the Raiders this season are Vikings, Chiefs, and Cowboys. Like, hats off to John Gruden.
Yeah.
Guy's making things happen, at least as a play caller. All right, my GPP quarterback is Mr. Carson Wentz at 5,700. So this is dependent on Deshaun Jackson returning. I truly think, look, it's backed up statistically too, where like every quarterback that Deshaun Jackson has had in his career, he's increased their yards per attempt when he's on the field versus when he's left their team. And with Wentz in particular, we've seen him just take his game to a different level when they have that true field stretcher out there on the field. In 2017, they had Torrey Smith and a better version of Mac Hollins out there for him the whole year. Last year, they brought in Mike Wallace to do that. He was pretty much hurt the entire year, so he never got a chance. And we saw what he did week 1 with Deshaun Jackson out there. Yep. So hopefully he should be back, because I think just not only will having Deshaun Jackson like help big plays, but that just clears out the entire middle of the field for Alshon Jeffrey and Zach Ertz, who we haven't quite seen reach their potential to this point. So volume is a concern. You know, he's been under 30 pass attempts in 4 of the last 5 games, and the Bears obviously aren't an easy matchup, but that's why I think it's more of a tournament play. And at 5,700, you know, I think it's a low enough price point that even if the volume maybe isn't there, he can still get a couple touchdowns and not completely tank your lineup.
And another tournament play that I'm leaning towards, it's just purely a matchup standpoint and perhaps regression week. I understand the play calling for the Jets has been abysmal, but against the Dolphins, does it really matter? Mason Rudolph even had been bad, around 4 air yards per attempt the entire season under center for Ben Roethlisberger. And then suddenly he gets the Dolphins and he averages just under 13 air yards per attempt. Yes, he struggled for a bit on 2 picks, but the fact is he was still going downfield and hit above fantasy expectations on his throws. Darnold now, he has a splint on his thumb, but it's just that the Dolphins have allowed 26 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. It is a tremendous get-right matchup with Xavier Howard, the number 1 corner, on IR. Rashad Jones, their starting safety, likely missing. It's just a tremendous get-right matchup for Robbie Anderson, Jamison Crowder, Le'Veon Bell, all involved on this Jets offense. I'm not worried about the offensive line. Miami doesn't create pressure, league low this year. So yeah, Darnold, I believe you can confidently go back to.
It was like 5 minutes of that Steelers-Dolphins game where we saw Xavier like having a bunch of success against Juju. He leaves, and all of a sudden the entire passing game takes
completely.
Up.
We do have a tournament question, though, here from JRod982, and that is better GPP play, Josh Allen or Matthew Stafford? Both good options, by the way.
Ooh, I kind of like Josh Allen in the bounce back spot this week. Everyone kind of got off him last week because of all the wind and everything going on. And, you know, we talked a little bit on our midseason review pod about how this Eagles defense might not be the same train wreck moving forward as we saw. That might not necessarily be true against Washington. You know, I do have some thoughts on their defense at their price point that we'll get to later. But with that said, you know, Quentin Dunbar and their 1 cornerback, he's dealing with a hamstring injury. Norman's banged up, hasn't been all that good recently anyway. And, you know, Josh Allen is one of these guys that is always a threat to throw for a couple touchdowns and also give you 50 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground. So I think as far as ceiling is concerned with that rushing upside, I'll take Allen.
I actually like Matthew Stafford better. We talked about the Dolphins allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. The Raiders are the stone worst, have allowed over 27 points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Stafford, as we know, the best part about stacking this Lions offense with Stafford is that the target tree is concentrated. Their 3rd receiver, which we'll discuss, has gotten a little more involved the past 2 weeks, but the fact is it is still Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay all the way through. And so it just makes for easy stacking opportunities because you know where the ball is going to go. TJ T.J. Hawkinson, the matchup doesn't matter whatsoever. Hasn't caught for over 35 yards since week 1. Terrific player on the field, but just not a fantasy option because of the way they use him.
They've been throwing the ball a lot more, too, since carrying one out, which makes
because
sense.
They have to, yeah. I thought their play calling would hinder them, but the fact is they've been tremendous play callers, and I think they lean on throwing the ball more. They're averaging over 9 yards per attempt. When they do, they need to continue throwing the ball, and I think they do against this Raiders defense. So I lean Stafford. But actually, I'll let you go ahead and start this running back building block.
Last week, my cash game running back was Tevin Coleman because I thought he had an underrated floor and some upside. This week, we're going back to that same matchup with Derrick Henry. And look, this is not I think we still think of Derrick Henry as the boomer bust. He needs to take one of his 10 or 12 touches per game to the house to really provide too much volume, but that's not been the case this year. I mean, they're finally just letting him be the focal point of the offense, and he hasn't completely gone off yet, but as you can see here up on the screen, the guy is still getting solid fantasy weeks, and he's getting it because he's got 15 touches in every single game this season. Only other running backs I can say that are Chris Carson, Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette, Nick Chubb, and Christian McCaffrey. And what do we got now? We got a matchup against Panthers defense that is very good against the pass. They're number 3 in DVOA against the pass. They're number 32 against the rush. They were number 30 last week too. So it's not like Shanahan and company just plummeted them out.
They're slowly becoming a true run funnel, yeah.
But they've been bad all season against the run. And this is, again, like the 49ers last week, this is one of the few offenses that is actually going to stick to the run no matter what happens in all likelihood and continue to attack that weakness. So with that said, I mean, it's also season low, $5,700 price tag for Derrick Henry on DraftKings. And look, the best is going to come with Derrick Henry because we've seen this happen throughout his career. He gets better as the season goes on. September and October in his career, 3.87 yards per carry. November, 4.9. December, 5.2. January, 5. So big bruiser. I wouldn't want to tackle the guy when it's cold out, and I think we're going to start to see some evidence of that this week.
Another big bruiser, and an obvious play, but we still need to talk about it, is Dalvin Cook. A tremendous matchup against the Chiefs, number 30 rush defense DVOA. The talk has been about Kirk Cousins and the passing offense, which has been tremendous. Over the last 4 weeks, Kirk Cousins, 315 yards and 2 scores per game. Having said that, Dalvin Cook in those games the last 4 weeks, still 21 carries, 103 yards, and 4 targets to boot. It is a tremendous matchup. Whether Patrick Mahomes plays or not, he's still going to get targets across the field. And if you're concerned about game script, like maybe it's lopsided with Matt Moore, the fact is it becomes lopsided because Dalvin Cook's involved from the beginning. So it's just one of those, whether it's tournament or cash plays, you lock him in and just figure out the rest around him. I don't care about his ownership.
Yeah, our projections actually have Cook projected higher than McCaffrey, even though he's 500 less on DraftKings.
And I think that's correct.
Yeah, and Cook's also our number 2 value back, even though he's priced up that high.
I think that's correct too, yeah.
All right, my tournament play is none other than Melvin Gordon, who's actually our number 1 value on the DFS toolkit. Because, look, again, this is more of a price thing than than me just loving Melvin Gordon so far. I've watched him play. He only has 1 run over 7 yards in these 4 games he's played, and it has not been pretty. With that said, what is Melvin Gordon doing at 5,000 and Eckler's doing at 6,000?
That's true.
It's been almost a 50-50 split to this point. But in Gordon's 4 games he's been back, he's had 16, 11, 18, and 10 touches with between 46 and 60% snaps every game. And I mean, Eckler last week had 5 touches the entire game. I know Eckler's the better receiver. I wouldn't argue with you if you wanted to say he's the better overall player and runner, but they're facing this Green Bay defense who, like I said before, they are a little bit better against the pass. Again, I think the way I see it playing out, I think Green Bay gets up and the Chargers do have to pass. That's why I have Rivers as my cash play. But if we're going tournaments, there is a scenario where they attack the weak spot of the Packers defense, which is the run. And if they're going to attack that interior, it's going to be with Melvin Gordon. Again, in 5,000 price point, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, for mine, Melvin Gordon actually, I will say 5 touches the last 2 weeks inside the 10. So just his touchdown equity alone makes him a tremendous play at his price point. Mine, people are going to say, we have to wait on James Conner news. If James Conner plays, I still want to play Jalen Samuels. I still will sprinkle in Jalen Samuels. I think we learned our lesson with the whole Chase Edmonds, David Johnson thing, whereas even if David Johnson plays, you should have had at least 25%. And I didn't, by the way. I was a donkey. I should have. But you should have had at least 25, 23% of Chase Edmonds sprinkled in in the case of him getting injured and Chase Edmonds being lower owned. I think that's what we're looking at with Jalen Samuels there. And recall, even if James Conner plays, one, there's always scare of re-injuring after he's now left 4 games out of 8 played early with an injury, and all different injuries, by the way. But two, Jalen Samuels can score in a variety of ways, so he's not just hindered like Benny Snell would have been before he got his meniscus trimmed reportedly. He's not hindered to just one role. It is both catching, or it is all catching, throwing the ball, and running the ball. So I like Jalen Samuels at his just next to minimum price point, even if James Conner plays. And if James Conner's out, it's just the lock of the century.
Yeah, Samuels has missed the last 2 games. Before that, he got injured in the game against the Ravens. But like that Bengals game, both him and Conner were active, and Samuels went out there and actually got 8 receptions for himself, in addition to the rushing and passing work that you mentioned. So I like that call.
But quickly, we are having a sale. I'm sure you've heard on the Rotoworld podcast as well, because we keep harping on it. But it's important because it's 50% off now. Don't be left out of your fantasy football playoffs. Go to rotoworld.com/win now. That's what we're using up there, actually, the DFS toolkit. And get 50% off NFL Season Pass and NFL DFS toolkit with the promo code NFL50. So, rotoworld.com/win. NFL 50 promo code, and you can use the toolkit like we are using here. But Ian, go ahead and continue with your wide receivers.
Same cash play I had last week, Mr. John Smokey Brown. And, you know, I hope you got off it last week just after we saw the 25 mile per hour
winds.
Yeah, I was about to say, all that wind. And I have looked ahead at the forecast, and it looks like we'll be under 20 miles per hour this week, which is a good start. But look, it's another really good matchup. You had the Eagles last week, and now he's got this Redskins defense where, mentioned before, and we were talking about Josh Allen, both their top cornerbacks are banged up at the moment. And the thing with Smokey Brown, like, we just got to realize this is no longer the boomer bust guy we saw in Arizona for all those years. Only John Brown and Michael Thomas have at least 50 receiving yards in every game they played in this season. We just really haven't seen Smokey break out since week 1. We had 123 yards and a touchdown against the Jets. He's too good to go this long without having another boom performance. I don't see why it can't happen this week. I will say I like him more on FanDuel, where he's priced as the wide receiver 20 compared to DraftKings, where he's the wide receiver 15. So, you know, all you FanDuel fans out there, get John Brown.
John Brown, yes, a good play now that we know about the wins this week. I'm making it simple, and I'm just going right back to Chris Godwin. Mike Evans was the one to boom last week, which is what we talked about after a 17-target game prior to their bye. But Chris Godwin, 14, 9, 12 targets coming into this game, had 8 targets. 12, 7, and 10 catches heading into the last game, only had 4 catches. It's just a simple regression model. You throw them in, whether Seattle feels the need to use Russ or not, and that's a big question mark. That's why I didn't want to talk about Russ as a cash game play, because the game flow is truly a worry for him in that Seattle offense. Not Chris Carson. The matchup more or less is tough for Chris Carson. But for Russ, we don't know if they're going to put their foot on the pedal or not. Either way, though, we know Jameis will put them in position for the Bucs offense to stay with their foot on the pedal. They can't run the ball, and they won't run the ball. They'll continue going through the air. Jameis Winston finished as the QB 12 on the week last week, and that was with 2 interceptions and 2 fumbles, because he still hits that 300-yard, 5-point bonus every single week and continues throwing touchdowns. Mike Evans on pace for 1,400 yards. Chris Godwin on pace for 1,600 yards on the year. They're just going to keep throwing. So Chris Godwin, lock it in and forget about it.
Godwin and Evans are tied for our highest projected wide receivers this week.
It's a tremendous matchup. That Seattle defense, as we know, is horrendous.
They have Shaq Griffin, who's their one good cornerback, but they don't move their cornerback, so they can tee off. All right, my GPP wide receiver is Robbie Anderson, for many of the same reasons why you like Sam Darnold as your GPP quarterback. I like Robbie. Look, the one guy on the Miami defense that you should have given any amount about was Xavier Howard. Now he's gone. So, you know, we saw Deontay Johnson, Juju, like receivers that have big playability just have a really good week against the Dolphins. That's been happening all season against these guys. They are not a good defense. And look, we got to kind of get the Jamison Crowder's 16-target game in week 1 out of our head, because since Demaryius Thomas has joined the roster, we've actually seen that a lot more condensed. So Demaryius is eating out of Crowder's underneath targets, not so much Robbie's deep ball targets. He's still at least gotten 6 targets in every single game with Darnold active this season. And like last week probably should have been a blow-up spot for Anderson. I know he only finished with 4 catches for 43 yards, but man, he roasted, I believe it was Trey Herndon, although it could have been Boye, one of his double moves from inside the 10-yard line, and the cornerback pretty much had to tackle him and, picked up a 40-yard pass interference instead of a 90-yard touchdown, which wasn't great for fantasy owners, but it just shows you that they are giving him these deep chances a couple times a game. And, if we're going to take a chance on Robbie Anderson to convert his 6 to 8 targets into a big week, what better time to do it than against the Dolphins?
M. Remus asked, what about Amendola? And I'm glad you asked that, M. Remus, because we are going to talk about Amendola because he's my tournament play. What I love most about Amendola, though, is that not only because he had that 1 6-yard catch in week 6 and then has since been involved on 68% of the line snaps. He's run 84% of their slot routes in that time with a 25% target share. But Amendola gives us contrarian ownership to a Lions offense that is poised to explode against this Raiders defense. So you can go even Marvin Jones and Amendola as a way to be contrarian off of Kenny Golladay. And having less ownership towards the ancillary pieces is the way you win tournaments. So that's why I love Amendola in particular. Another question we have, though, is T-Powered, because he asked, Mike Williams' air yards have been crazy. Does he finally do something with those? And what he's referring to is since Mike Williams has come back from injury, over the last 4 games, 507 air yards, which leads every single skill player at his position. But yet, only 44 fantasy points in that time, whereas you go to the next guy, Stephon Diggs, who's had 498 air yards in that span, 94 fantasy points.
No, keep riding Mike Williams. It's going to come.
And the best part about Mike Williams in tournaments only this week, is that everyone is going to be so disappointed from last week, that 4-catch dud. Having said that, as you said, still led the team, or still second on team in air yards behind Keenan Allen. This Chargers offense is poised to explode. That's why I like Phillip Rivers, as you said, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams all together. And you can run it back with the Packer of your choice, most likely Aaron Jones.
It's Mike Williams, Jamison Crowder, and one other receiver, the only guys with over 50 targets this season without a touchdown. Mike Williams is too good to not find the end zone for much longer.
And too much opportunity in general.
Yes, exactly.
But let's go ahead and move on to this final position, tight end building block, Ian.
All right, so, if I'm going to be rolling with Phillip Rivers, I'm going to be rolling with who's been his pretty much number 1 target since he returned, Mr. Hunter Henry.
Yep.
Triple H, come on down. And look, here's the thing with Hunter Henry. He's come back. He had 8 catches, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns in his, quote-unquote limited game that kind of screwed a bunch of fantasy owners. But since then, he's still gone for 6 catches, 97 yards, and then 4 catches, 47 yards last week. I don't want to say ignore that Bears game, but there was just so little play volume to kind of go around that I'm not necessarily going to be out on these guys just because of the one bad week. Because look, over that span, he's had a position high 23 targets. And, again, kind of like Mike Williams, I do think Hunter Henry is one of these players that is truly one of the better talents at their position.
Oh, so for sure.
If the targets are there, I'm just going to keep going back to that well. It's not the most amazing matchup. I know Darnell Savage is a very good safety. But with that said, basing your fantasy plays too much on matchups is already kind of an issue, and especially at the tight end position where, who knows if he's even going to be matched up on Savage for the entire game. And if the Chargers do get behind, like I kind of think they will, we could see a bunch of underneath stuff to him. So I love the Phillip Rivers and Hunter Henry stack in cash.
Yeah, that's a tremendous one. For me in cash, I think you can just go right back to Darren Waller. Darren Waller still got 8 targets last week, but it was a tough matchup. And they used him properly, actually. They lined him up out wide a few times just to throw against Garyon Conley, who the Raiders savagely traded to Houston the week before they played him, for a reason, by the way, because they continued attacking him. You saw what Tyrell Williams did. But yeah, it's just Darren Waller continues to be the number 1 target on this team, even with Tyrell Williams active. You cannot find a target share that matches his among tight ends. He's going to finish as the top 2 tight end on the year, and he's matchup proof given that his targets come underneath. So it's just a confident play you can set in your cash lineup and just come away happy with. The Lions, again, Texans were a tough matchup, but the Lions have allowed the 8th most receiving yards to opposing tight ends. So yeah, just another good matchup for him.
So many targets. All right, the tight end I like in GPPs is Mr. Rookie Noah Fant. And I know it hasn't been great this year. I know he's got Brandon Allen on quarterback. None of these things are ideal. But for once, it's looking like we're going to see him in a full-time role. Because low-key, and Hawkinson's kind of had to deal with the same thing to an extent. But like they have not given these tight ends, these rookie first-round tight ends, a full like 90% plus snap roll. Like Fant's been in the 60-70% range because they've been hooking up Jeff Hireman with a good amount of snaps and a couple targets per game. Hireman's got a knee issue, and Fangio already said like it's definitely a possibility he's out this week. So if Hireman's out, fire up Fant at 3K, because last week he had a season-high 9 targets and 5 receptions in the first game without Emmanuel Sanders. I mean, at least I at first looked at it more as Deshaun Hamilton would be the guy to get more involved as a number 2 option behind Courtland Sutton. It could easily be Noah Fant, and if that is going to be the case moving forward, I mean, he's got an awesome schedule this week against the Browns. I'm with Demarius Randall still sidelined, especially. I'm not worried about those safeties. And yeah, man, it's gross. Brandon Allen's under center, I know, but at 3,000, I think he's priced around with a bunch of committee tight ends in that price range. So he's the cheapest full-time, somewhat talented tight end you can get.
So someone whose salary has now dropped for the 3rd straight week. Let's talk about this, because eventually number 2 in targets among all tight ends, number 2 in air yards among all tight ends, and tied for 2nd in red zone targets among all tight ends, and yet Zach Ertz has only scored 1 touchdown. Eventually, this experiences positive regression. Eventually, he does much better. I understand Dallas Goedert has been used more inside the 10-yard line. Dallas Goedert continues playing more snaps, but Deshaun Jackson being added back into this offense, I believe, opens it up more for Ertz. Goddard is still an option, but I think it's Goddard who's hurt, given his fewer targets than Ertz in the last month. I think Goddard's the one who gets hurt on this. So I'm going back to Ertz. It's once again a tremendous salary spot, and at some point he's going to have more than just 1 touchdown on the year. So I want Ertz everywhere.
Yeah, his last 2 kind of duds as well. Cowboys, who always kind of make a point to take him out of the game, and then Bills, that's just a tough matchup. So
Addy Slim asks, do you think Fells is worth trusting as a dart tight end play? Fells, who has led all tight ends in the month of October in red zone targets, and Fells, who has had two touchdown performances now in his last 4 games, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're on the main slate, but I'm with him if you're playing some kind of funky.
Let's say you're playing all day Sunday, yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, go with it, because look, I mean, I touch on tight ends every week in my wide receiver cornerback column, and I was hesitant to trust either Fells or Akins, even though they had good games before, because they were splitting snaps and targets all season. That changed last week. Fells was actually on the field for 90% of the offensive snaps. Akins took a back seat for really the first time all season. So clearly he's got a nice red zone chemistry with Watson, and if he's actually going to be on the field enough to continue to take advantage of that, yeah, he's fine.
Let's say you were playing, we're not going to talk about the Sunday night game too much, even though it's a good one on NBC, but let's say you have an option between Mark Andrews, Marquise Brown, and Mark Ingram. How do you rank these Ravens players against the Patriots defense?
I go Ingram, Andrews, Brown.
Yeah, because Andrews, the past month with Marquise Brown in and out of the lineup, has led this team with a 28% target share. Andrews is safe, but it's also he's only safe because the rest of his position bottoms out. That's why Andrews is a top 8 tight end every single week. But for DFS, it's just tough. It's like, does he really reach his ceiling in this matchup?
Probably not, which is why I got Ingram ranked above both of them, I guess. But it's, anyone against the Patriots, we know it's just the most brutal matchup imaginable. But, if we really want to just get more scientific with it, like Hollywood's got to go up against Gilmore, who is probably the best, if not best or second best cornerback in the league. Andrews also dealing with that. The Patriots have allowed more yards per rush than they have per pass this season, which is absolutely ridiculous. So, Ingram, even in games where they've kind of had to come back from behind, he still ends up with between 10 and 15 touches almost every single week. So.
And before we run off of defense really quick, let's get to one more flex question. Would you go Terry McLaurin or Kenny Stills? Kenny Stills, who 5 targets still. Kenny Stills, 5 targets still, but without Will Fuller, and we can say without Will Fuller because he played 3 snaps then left the game. He's basically been out for 2 weeks. Kenny Stills has still played 95% of the Houston snaps, still nearly mirrored DeAndre Hopkins in targets. It's just that DeAndre Hopkins, what has happened without Will Fuller, Hopkins has been elevated, 34% target share the last 2 weeks, 44% of their air yards the last 2 weeks. It's like Fuller's opportunity just handed Hopkins even more. Yeah. But that's why Steele is a flex option, because he's still running every single offensive play with Watson on the field.
Look, I mean, we saw Will Fuller have almost nothing but bust weeks until his obviously incredibly big boom week. That's going to happen with Kenny Stills to an extent as well, so don't be scared off from last week's one dud. Like you said, he's on the field. The big plays are going to come. They definitely could come against the Jaguars.
And Anna Banana asked, where's your Halloween costume?
I don't have a Halloween costume.
I don't have one either. I'm three-hole punch John.
We're so lame. We're too busy prepping this shit.
All right, defense, go ahead. Let's rattle this one off quickly.
All right, I am looking at, all right, hopefully I don't throw up as I say this, but the Washington Redskins.
We're dressed as reserves, by the way. That's what we are.
The Washington Redskins at 1,800. Look, I mean, I'm talking about firing up Smokey Brown. I'm not saying we're going to get a dominant defensive performance from this Washington defense. Again, their cornerbacks are banged up and all that, but they're not like a train wreck, terrible defense. And this was kind of earlier in the season, I said the Jets when they were facing the Cowboys, like you can fire up their defense. Because when we have a defense priced underneath the old minimum of 2K on DraftKings, like I want to see a terrible defense facing an amazing offense. I don't think we have either of those things. I mean, the Redskins, they've allowed fewer than 20 points in each of the last 3 weeks. They played the Vikings and Minnesota. I mean, I know the Vikings moved the ball up and down the field, but I'll give the Washington some credit for keeping them out of the end zone. And then that 49ers kind of mud fest, don't need to take too much away from that game, but hey, they still held the 49ers to 9 points. So, yeah, 1,800. We know if you watch Josh Allen even once in your life, you know the guy makes 2 to 3 just boneheaded decisions.
The fumbles are the big issue, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So 1,800, you can get some turnovers. And, it would not be the most shocking thing ever to me if we see this turn to a low-scoring like barn burner, which, hey, that can benefit the defense.
Oh, if you want to spend up at defense, something called Brandon Allen is starting for the Broncos. He's made 15 preseason appearances throughout his career, and he has tossed 6 touchdowns, 11 picks, and averaged 6.7 yards per attempt in the preseason and 15 preseason games. So just start the Browns defense. Has the Browns defense been off? Yes, but they finally have both Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams completely healthy. I don't even expect them to be on the injury report this week. And they still have the stout Myles Garrett, Olivia Vernon, so on and so on. Like, they're still a great play this week. But with that being said, let's go ahead and make this lineup for people.
You start it.
I'm going to start it because I want to get a jump on your Phillip Rivers play.
Okay.
I left that one for you because I wanted to talk about it because I think he's a tremendous play.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to roll with my RB of the week, Mr. Derrick Henry.
And once again, we're using the Rotoworld DFS toolkit, rotoworld.com/win if you'd like to be a part of it and follow along.
Yeah, and Derrick Henry, we got Melvin Gordon, Dalvin Cook, Trot Carson, and Derrick Henry are our top 4 value plays of the week. Don't play Carson with that said, but sometimes when a guy has that salary, real near the minimum, even an 8 or 9 point projection can make him pop. But
so you're playing Derrick Henry?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to play. I want to get a Rivers stat going here. I'm going to go back to Mike Williams.
Okay.
No one's going to play him, and it could bust, but that's why it's a tournament. The air yards mean something, man.
What is he,
it's
like
got to happen.
4,600?
It's 4,600. So the salary got worked into his the ownership got worked into his algorithm, so his salary increased 600, but that's fine. You know what you're getting is a tournament play.
Keep going back to
I'm going to keep chasing it. I don't give a damn. I'm going to keep chasing it.
Okay. I'm going to go with Danny Amendola off the grid a little bit. I know you mentioned him, and I love this spot too. I mean, he fell off the map after that week 1 game that he balled out in, but like we were saying, like they're throwing the ball more because A, they've been really good at throwing the ball this year, and B, they don't have a consistent running back to go in between the tackles. So even though I'm sure Patricia doesn't like it, they're going to keep throwing the ball.
I agree. Phillip Rivers, Derrick Henry, Mike Williams, and Danny Amendola. I'm going to run back that small stack of the Chargers with Aaron Jones, who I think is the most confident option among the Packers. If Devontae Adams come back, it is pretty intriguing to load him up. But the other players around him are just interesting and intriguing, but that's why they're only tournaments. Like I would expect Lazard kicks out to the outside and they move Allison on the inside. The last 2 weeks, MVS has played the fewest snaps among the entire group of receivers, but those are still like darts, whereas we know Aaron Jones will continue to get involved no matter what, both in the passing game and on the ground.
Yeah, that's kind of the conclusion I came to as well when I was breaking down the wide receivers. Like we had that game a couple weeks ago. Rodgers went 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, and like no one even had more than 5 targets. This is a new offense where he's on when he actually has a play caller for at least first and second down, like they're going to spread the ball out more. So Adams is going to get his. We know Aaron Jones probably get his, but I don't think we're necessarily going to see a consistent number 2 wide receiver emerge out of here because they don't need 1-2 necessarily.
Yeah, Aaron Jones leads this team in target share, believe it or not.
He's the only running back in the league that leads their team in targets.
14.7, just under 15% as their leading target share guy. That's crazy.
That's hilarious. All right, throw the Washington defense in there. It's so cheap. You know, we don't have the Patriots to mess everything up on this main slate. And, yeah, you know, I want to gift our lovely listeners some extra salary.
All right, so we got one more to fill in. Right now we have Phillip Rivers, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Mike Williams in that Chargers-Green Bay game stack, Danny Amendola, and Washington defense. So I'm going to steal this salary and not give our listeners any salary. And I'm going to take Dalvin Cook in the flex. Nice. Let's just lock it up. And then you have 11.6 left for wide receiver and tight end. That's more than enough.
You can squeeze Hunter Henry in there.
100%. You can squeeze Darren Waller if you want to go back from the Lions game as well. You can 100% squeeze whatever you want.
Thank God I was nice with the defense.
So with that being said, thank you for your questions. And again, rotoworld.com/DFS. You can follow along. That was a tight 35 minutes, something like that episode. We hit all the points.
Let's go.
Thank you for joining. He's Ian Hartitz. I am John Daigle. Sunday morning, NBC Sports, Twitch, and YouTube.